I now have the extreme pleasure of introducing tonight's program, Stagecoach and Tavern Days by Erik Larson. After an overwhelming enthusiastic response to a crowd of more than 60 at the Senior Center, many people asked to have this presentation done here. So Erik agreed to do that. He's going to share stories about the early days of stagecoaches and taverns. There's some rare pictures of 15 different taverns in town and how they have evolved over time. Erik.
All right. Thank you very much. On to history. Okay. Stagecoach and Tavern Days in Shrewsbury. What is there to say? Stagecoaches at the time, the early 1700s, there was many routes for stagecoaches. If you left Boston, there were three major routes to get down to New York City. Ours was the upper, right down Route 9, out through the Brookfields, and then down south. Post road workers and signs, stagecoach ads. Okay, here's a couple of the post road markers. There's the original post road marker that was out by this Massachusetts 6th Turnpike. That's at the corner. That's the on-ramp to 290 eastbound. And then there's the one at Dean Park also. Anyways, here's where it looked like in real life. This is that's the road behind it, and that's the intersection down on Main Street, Lower Main Street. Here's the Levi Pease Rock. Levi Pease he was somewhat of a rich man, but when he passed away, he didn't have much money. He actually didn't have a headstone. So in 1898, when Shrewsbury Historical Society started, in 1900, we raised the money for a stone for him. You can see the stone in 1900. Here's a little ad that he had. When he was bringing people from Springfield to Dartmouth College, genteel ride over the humble highways. Your humble servant Levi Pease, 1792. Here's the stage notice coming from Worcester to Shrewsbury to Northborough to Westborough and then back again, the Shrewsbury stage. And here's another stage line advertisement. Here's the stagecoach. This looks like the house on Main Street, lower Main Street. Boutel. S.B. Boutel's house. And you can see there's two carriage holders on the very top of the stage, so you could get 6 people riding on top of the stage, 2 people driving it, and then 6 people inside of it. And here's the Abbott Downing coaches. All right, this is up at the Flume. They have an actual reproduction stage. Well, I shouldn't say reproduction. It's been refinished, and it's all open. It's Christine and I. This is about 20 years ago. We were up there looking at it. But it's really cool how high up they sat, and it was a good machine. It really worked well. You can see all the boxes. And inside, there's 2 of the bench seats on the top, but inside, they had felt linings, and they had a leather back strap so you could nestle yourself in a corner on those long trips and along the route. Taverns in Shrewsbury. Okay, one of the first taverns in Shrewsbury was the Slocum Tavern on West Main Street. They had painted pine trees. They had the walls plastered. You can see by that little inlet in the far side. And they painted pine trees on the walls. It kind of looks like the Old Salem Townhouse in OSV. And there it is there. This is about 7 years ago when they knocked it down. I went over from UMass and took photos of them knocking it down. It's now the child care study. Joel Norse, right up the street. There's the Norse house as originally looked, and it's got now the overhangs on it. There's another picture of it when it was more of a tavern. Okay, the Norse family took in an ill man at one time. He was very sick, it was 1830s, and the man was healed back to being correct again, and he emailed his parents that he was going to do something nice for these people. So when he got out, he carved a Mason's cross in the front of their stone. You can see the little cross in the very front. As a way of saying these people had good Christian values. There's the house. This is like the 1930s. There's a house, well, in 1980s. You can still see it has the three main doors. And there's a house today. Well, that was the Norse Tavern where stagecoaches would stop now and then. Farther up the street is the Howe Tavern. This was the first tavern in Shrewsbury. We have a deed from 1740 in which it's signed by 20 or 30 Shrewsbury citizens that say the Howe Tavern would be a great place for people to stay overnight and you could have a drink there. But there's the Howe Tavern. That's back when it was sitting out by the road. Later on, they moved it 200 feet back and they turned the house around so it now faces Mount Wachusett. There's the backside of the tavern. Erastus Sumner from the Sumner House. They owned the Cushion Haven Tavern at one time. It's the big tavern coming up. Here's the Haven Tavern. It was a huge tavern. The first section's about 100 feet long. The second section is about 40 feet long. It was huge, and there was a big barn behind it for hooking up all the horses. And also they had cattle and ducks that were brought into Worcester, and they would stay there also. But while you were there, you could order what you want to eat. And here's a group of men right outside the tavern. Pine panels, raised pine panels. It was really nice built. Now, we had a chance in 1960 to purchase it. Alexander LeBeau. He was president at the time. It was $8,000. However, we didn't have $8,000, and it was about $5,000 to move it down the street to an empty lot, which we couldn't do either. But we couldn't do it, so it left our hands. But in the menu, you can see all the different things you can eat, and you can also order hay and oats for your horses. Well, I thought it was pretty good. All right, the Thanksgiving Day, the ball. Here's the ball. In 1800, they were having Thanksgiving parties in the Haven House, in the ballroom. Now, 1873, they decided to break up the tavern. They brought the big side and brought it over to what was going to be the Big D parking lot. There's one section. The other three sections got moved downtown into separate homes. There's the main hallway, the main door. That's a picture of the 1950s, 1960s. Okay, around the corner is the Haven House, or the Stone House. This is the cattle show parade in 1877. This was another tavern. You'd drive up with your horse and wagon. You could park. You could go in and have a draft beer or something to eat and stay over if you wanted. And then across the street was Samuel Haven's house. This is the original Samuel Haven, who built the little general store in the center of Shrewsbury, 1804. Chris, will you read that one back? You can see the 4-story addition he put on the right-hand side, all for guests. And we had a little pamphlet that came out, the Shrewsbury News. And in it, you could say you could come to Shrewsbury right here and take a nice rest. It's a beautiful area to live in, wonderful sweet breezes, great vegetables and food. And here it is. It was put on the National Historic Register, 1816. Here's where it's the Shrewsbury News still, the Shrewsbury Inn. There it is. So that's a colorized photo from 1906 was postmarked. And now that's a 1920s view. Inside, it's nice. It looks so much like this. These are all photos I took from these are 1920 photos. And there's a bunch that I took when I went through it. Christine and I walked through it about 5 or 6 years ago. I took a lot of these photos. I love the main hallway. It's got that big door. And then you go up the stairs to the second floor.
Is this the one that sits in the corner?
Yeah, right over there.
It's for sale now.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yep. All right, this is from the second floor of the room. Also, the next room is the, all right. You'll notice the canvas ceiling. You can't see it that well. That ceiling's made out of canvas that's stretched really tight. and nailed in the corners. And when they had it painted, the men were working on it, and they opened it up, and inside was 2 beer bottles. So the guys were, they opened it up, and there was 2 beer bottles inside. So I had to take a picture of that. Then down the cellar, they had the magic door, the cellar door. Supposedly, it went underneath the Main Street or Boylston Street and came out into the cemetery. And here's the old milestone down at Dean Park. There's a picture of the mile. You can barely see the lettering on it. This was the original Artemis Ward house. Later on, he sold it to the Baldwins, and they made the Tavern out of it. And then they went across the street in 1727 and built the house that's there. And then if you go back one, there's the Baldwin Tavern. That's what's left of the Baldwin estate. And then you go down the street is the Ross Wyman Tally-Ho Inn. And that was a famous inn. And they say you could sit there and have tea by the fire and have something to eat and drink and talk about how bad the British were. And he was also a gunsmith, and he made a pistol for Artemis Ward, because Artemis Ward said, when I shoot a British man, I want him to fly over backwards. And here's the Tally-Ho Inn. There's their little restaurant. And that's before it got broken up. There's the building itself. Looks exactly the same. This is from Old Times in Shrewsbury by Elizabeth Ward. This is the old Pease Tavern, Walnut and Main Street. There's the tavern there. And the Pease Tavern was a great place. Levi Pease was the first stage master from Boston to New York. 1793, he got the mail contract. He would take a group of people from Boston, and Shrewsbury was their first stop. That's how we got the Levi Pease, the station master. And he would swing around the back. This is a 1906 postcard. And in back, they had a covered area. And inside the covered area, you had holes in the sides of the wall. And you could climb up with your boots on, open the window, and go in through the second floor window. And then you could look and see if there was any beds that were empty. So you could find some place to sleep without waking anyone up. That's in the 1930s. Yeah. There they are refinishing it. That was the 1970s. That's George Leonard on the left-hand side, and he had a big map, and I got the map photo from eBay. They wanted $600 for it. And I kind of asked if I could bid less. No, I've got a bidder at $600. So, it was a close one, but it had water damage too. And that's a more modern photo of it. Very nice house. It lost the huge fireplace. They have a regular fireplace. They have the regular newel post going to the second floor. Here's the newel post. And they had gun stock beams. In the corners, you'd see a big beam start off 8 inches. As it up towards the top, it would spread out about an extra 4 inches on like the left side. So it would catch the other beam that came over. On the second floor, one 18-foot wall in the middle had big straps on it. You can see that strap coming down. There's one, there's the other. During the day in the 1750s, 1800s, they'd lift both walls up and hook the wall up so you had one giant room. So now you could have a little orchestra in there and they could play music and people could dance on the second floor. It was known for that. Plus they had they had a room for the masons around the corner with no doors or windows in it so people wouldn't bother them. Right here, here's the executor's sale, 1824 for the Captain Levi Pease house. And here's our stone to him. We were incorporated in 1898, 1900. We collected enough money for a bronze plaque for Levi Pease. Okay, if we go down to the lake and the floating bridge, here's the Monroe Tavern. On the left-hand side, on the other side, we're in Worcester looking towards Shrewsbury. Monroe Tavern was very well known on the lake. A lot of people, okay, that was from a stereo view I have. Shows the tavern and all the land around it is all Shrewsbury in the backdrop. And this is a photo we have upstairs in our Historical Society of the Monroe Tavern on Lake Quincy. Up from the tavern is the Arcade Tavern. All these taverns you people have to understand, stagecoaches came through, and they would stop at different taverns, depending which one you wanted, which one they had maybe some in with, but they'd stop there and they'd let people off, and they could eat there and sleep there and then continue on, or they could just have a rest break. There's the Arcade Tavern. That was very popular. It had 2 entrances, and the next photo I zoomed in on because you can see the boot scraper on the second step on the far left. Because this was mucky times, you wanted to scrape all the bad stuff off your feet when you walked in. Now it's a car wash. Here's the Harrington Tavern. I remember the Harrington Tavern. It was a big farmhouse with a big long barn attached to it. I was in the 3rd or 4th grade when I drove by in my bus, and the building was on fire. They would set the building on fire, and they were having the junior volunteers put the fire out. I remember, well, what happened? You know, they burnt the tavern down, but that's what happens. That was burnt up. And of course, 1878, they had dances there. Very popular place for dances. Okay, on the right-hand side is the Harrington Tavern store. On the left-hand side is the tavern. And that big area on the far left side, the 2nd floor, was the big ballroom. It was like 75 feet long and about 20 feet wide. Very big. They also had a nice barn hooked onto the tavern, so you could have your horses stay there. The barn was there. It was built nicely, and post and beam and everything. When here they are taking it down, they took the barn down and they put the barn up in Framingham. So it's the Maycomber Farm. So we drove out, Christine and I drove out to Maycomber Farm, and we saw the Harrington barn the way it is. And you can kind of take a look at it. It looks just like it did when it was attached to the old house. You can see some of the implements around it, and there's a water bath there too. There's my water bath. Now Harrington Farm is Staples. What's left? Harrington Farms, condos in Tavern Street, right behind it. That's what's left of the old farmhouse. All right, we go a little bit more west, right across from the old Shrewsbury Nurseries was the Balchdene Tavern. That was very famous. Dr. Balchdene was one of the first people around here to give injections against smallpox. And here we are at the tavern. In the next photo, we see, okay, this is underneath the fireplace. To hold the fireplace up, they had this giant brick arch. I remember going into the building when I was a kid working at Shrewsbury Nurseries. I was like 15 or 16. It had to be like 73, 74. And it didn't look much different than it did right now. There it is. That's old Route 9 in the 1880s. It was a dirt road going by. That's the state police visiting the farmhouse. And you're going to remember that farmhouse was there long before Route 9 because it's on Walnut Street going out to Westboro. And that's the way I remembered it, that little spruce tree, it was now huge. And then there was a big time. Let's save the Balchdene Tavern. It would be good to have it for a smallpox inoculation area. So let's hoist it up and we'll move it around the corner and we'll settle it down on a new foundation. But unfortunately, that's all that happened. Then all of a sudden one day it was gone. There's nothing but bits of wood there. And all that's left is Balchdene's gravestone. A lot of these stories come from Elizabeth Ward's book on the history of Shrewsbury, along with a couple of the articles from the Mike Perna book. But if anyone ever comes up with any more information on any of the Shrewsbury taverns, I'd love to hear it. Thank you very much.